in the final days of the American Civil War, as the Confederacy was collapsing, gold worth millions of dollars today vanished on its way to the Deep South. It was not captured or seized by Union troops. Many believe it was either lost, stolen, or buried in the chaos of the final days of the war. Whatever the case, it has become one of the most famous legends from the American Civil War. When people think of the Civil War, they usually think of large battles in Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Georgia. But in the Deep South, Florida had only one major battle. It was far from the capital and did not see many attempts by Union forces to seize territory. Florida played a different role as the breadbasket of the Confederacy. Florida's long coastline was the perfect place for blockade runners to sneak past Union naval patrols to bring in desperately needed supplies. Salt from Florida's coast was used to preserve meat for the Army. Florida cattle fed troops across the South. Florida's role was to feed the troops and help keep the Confederacy alive. The state saw very few larger battles except for the Battle of Olustee in 1864. It was one of the largest battles ever fought on Florida soil. The battle ended in Confederate victory. Over 10,000 men met on the battlefield. The Union suffered 1,861 casualties. The Confederates, 949. It was an overwhelming Confederate victory. The Union were pushed back to Jacksonville, ending their campaign to sever Confederate supply lines. But it really didn't matter in the end, because soon enough the Confederacy itself would collapse. By the spring of 1865, the end was near. For months, Union General Ulysses S. Grant had battered the Confederate lines at Petersburg, just south of Richmond. The siege continued month after month, and the Confederate Army was wearing down. On April 2, 1865, General Robert E. Lee sent word to Richmond. Richmond could no longer be defended. He advised the government to flee. The message reached Davis while he was attending services at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The Confederate government began to evacuate on the last open rail line. They carried supplies, documents, and the Confederate Treasury. That night, sites across Richmond were torched. Bridges and supply depots were burned to keep them from falling into Union hands. The powder magazine was blown up in the early morning hours of April 3rd. The fire spread across Richmond, leveling city block after city block. By morning, Richmond was in ruins. On April 3rd, Union troops marched into the city. The Confederate capital had fallen. The Confederate States of America were on the brink of collapse. Jefferson Davis had fled the city by train with members of his cabinet, officers, and government officials. They were headed to Danville, Virginia. Danville would become the last capital of the Confederacy for only 8 days. On April 9, 1865, General Lee surrendered at Appomattox. The war was over for most across the South, but Jefferson Davis refused to accept this. He believed that the Confederacy could continue the fight in the West. The government continued moving south, through the Carolinas and into Georgia. As the Confederate government fled, the Treasury moved with his entourage by wagon. Gold and silver bullion, along with whatever else remained. It was all packed into trunks and heavily guarded. By mid-April 1865, General Lee had surrendered, and Confederate armies were laying down their arms across the South. But Davis and the Treasury kept moving. Some guards remained loyal, but others saw a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Some of the Treasury was paid out for expenses and troop payments, but some of the Treasury was looted. Davis arrived near Sandersonville, Georgia on May 6. He continued on without the Treasury, heading south. Some accounts suggest that part of the Treasury moved towards Florida. Florida had few Union patrols to worry about. It was isolated and movements could go unnoticed. A group of Confederate guards entered Florida in early May, escorting part of the Treasury, documents, and Jefferson Davis's personal belongings. In late May, the guards arrived at Cottonwood Plantation. David Levy Yulee was a former U.S. Senator and a key figure in Florida's early railroad. Yulee owned the plantation known as Cottonwood, near Archer in Alachua County. The guards hid the wagons and dropped off chests containing records and Davis's belongings. The men learned of Jefferson Davis's capture. Some accounts claim that the guards divided the gold among themselves, each man taking 400 gold sovereigns and travel expenses. Once Yulee arrived, he told the men they should seek parole at the nearest Union encampment and surrender. The men left immediately. Some of them surrendered at Baldwin, the others at Waldo. There were no stories about recovered gold during their surrender, so stories have spread that the men buried the gold on the road or somewhere near the plantation, knowing that they would be searched after surrendering. After David Levy Yulee learned about the trunks of records and luggage, he transported them to a nearby railroad depot in Waldo. Union Captain O.E. Bryant learned about the trunks containing Davis's belongings. He arrested Yulee in Gainesville. Bryant and his men arrived at Cottonwood. They confiscated the wagons and spoke with Mrs. Yulee. He later wrote,
I met Mrs. Yulee, claimed and received the hospitality of the house, and ascertained that the trunk and chest had been removed. I asked her to state frankly where I might find them. After a moment's reflection, she said they were the private effects of Mr. Davis, and she had received them that she might deliver them to Mrs. Davis, who was an esteemed friend.
Bryant arrived and found them in an unlocked storeroom. It is unclear if any gold was discovered in the trunks. David Levy Yulee was imprisoned at Fort Pulaski for 9 months for aiding in the escape of President Jefferson Davis. David Levy Yulee was released in 1866 after being pardoned by President Andrew Johnson. By the time Union forces closed in, the Confederate Treasury had been hidden, stolen, or lost. But the man at the center of it all was still on the run. Jefferson Davis continued south with his small escort, hoping to escape Union forces, and hoping to continue the fight in the West. On May 10, 1865, near Irwin, Georgia, Union cavalry launched a surprise raid against Davis. Jefferson Davis was captured without a fight. When Davis was captured, he was wearing his wife's black shawl and a waterproof wrapper. His wife had put it over him to try to keep him from the cold. Davis was widely criticized in the North, claiming that he was wearing women's clothing. The President of the Confederate States of America was now a prisoner. After his capture, questions immediately began to circulate. What did Jefferson Davis know? Some believe he had ordered the gold to be hidden to fund a future resistance. Others believed he lost control during the chaotic retreat. Davis himself denied any wrongdoing. He claimed that the funds had been used properly, and that whatever remained had been properly handled. In the years after the war, stories began to spread across the South of buried gold and hidden caches. Some claimed the gold was buried near railroad routes, hidden quickly as the Union approached. Others believed that it remained somewhere near Cottonwood Plantation, possibly still buried there to this day, or dug up long ago by the men who stashed it. Of course, not all of the stories point to Florida. Some believe that the gold was stolen by guards during the retreat, spent or dispersed before the war officially ended, or it was absorbed into local economies. There are even stories that portions of the treasury were hidden in entirely different states or taken out west. But Florida remains one of the most compelling, and the accounts that are tied to David Levy Yulee and his plantation. The Civil War ended in 1865. The Confederacy collapsed, and life went on for many as it had for generations. The lost Confederate gold could be worth tens of millions of dollars today. Was it buried in Florida, taken west, or simply spent while Davis attempted to flee? I guess we may never know, but there is a chance that it could still be out there, waiting for someone to discover it. I want to thank y'all for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the next. Peace.